Alrighty, we'll jump into it. Hope everyone is doing well. Yeah, thanks for joining. Just wanted to get on here and go through a couple things. The market's kind of an interesting place right now, and so just wanted to share some insights. I'm a full-time buyer agent with Keller Williams here in Coeur d'Alene, and yeah, I work with Zach Davis. He's been doing it, for 10 years. He's a listing agent now, so he works with all of our sellers. I work with all of our buyers. And yeah, it's been, an interesting market, especially coming off, COVID years, when it's been pretty intense. It still is in different ways and, can be a confusing market. Especially, everybody talks about how interest rates are so high. So Zach and I thought we'd put something together that we can share that kind of, maybe exposes some myths and then gives people some, just information that they can use to make informed decisions. And so, yeah, we'll just keep it to 30 minutes quick and feel free to reach out afterwards if you have any information or any questions or need some more information. Um, all right. Yeah. So the title of it is Why You Don't Have to Wait for Lower Rates to Buy. Yeah. So do you feel stuck? I mean, we hear this a lot, and we kind of feel it ourselves sometimes too. So have you not bought because, payments feel out of reach? When you think about your payment going to be three or $4,000 a month, that's crazy. Um, or do you already own a home, maybe bought during COVID or refinanced during COVID where you got, a 2 or 3% interest rate? And so if you sold that and moved up to a bigger home, that would, double your payment a month, for a slightly bigger home. Or do you want to invest in real estate but don't know where to start? Everything's prices are crazy for what they were, 5, 6 years ago. Um, for most people, it seems like they'd be ready to buy if the numbers actually worked. So maybe if you like this guy in the picture. Um, go over Kootenai County snapshot a little bit, the market. In July, the median price was $580,000. That's a 5.5 increase from last year. So it shows that there's still demand, the market's still growing. But last month, 37% of listings had price drops, which shows that sellers are realizing that they need to start lowering their prices. Um, and then compared to what the price was listed at, it actually sold at 98%, which shows that there's still some wiggle room in there. Even if they're lowering the price, 37, not 37%, but if they're lowering the price to whatever they lower it to, they're still selling at 98% of that. So there's still a little bit of wiggle room, even if they've lowered. The average pending ratio is 26.1%. So out of all the homes listed in the greater Coeur d'Alene area, 26.1 of them are currently under contract. So that means, 74% of homes are just sitting on the market, which shows that it's a pretty strong buyer's market. So about 30% pending ratio is balanced. Anything under 30% means that buyers have an advantage because it means that less houses are under contract, so there's more available to get. Anything over 30% leans towards the seller's market. Like during COVID, when everything was at 60 or 70% pending, that means you had to act immediately to get a house under contract. So when we look at the data, it kind of points to a buyer's market, but a lot of people say it doesn't feel like a buyer's market. And so maybe you feel like this guy scratching your head, kind of confused, what's going on? And a lot of it is like a psychology gap is what I've been calling it to some buyers, because there's more inventory than ever, fewer buyers than ever. And so it looks like it should be a strong buyer's market, but not yet. And so a lot of sellers are stuck in the COVID mentality, when how, especially here in Kootenai County, where things were just flying off the shelves for, 20, 30, um, 40, 50,000 over asking even in cash. And so you still see these buyers to or sellers today, when I'm going out with people looking at houses to buy, we'll go look at a house and it's, way overpriced because the seller's just holding on to hope that a cash buyer from California is going to come and, buy their house for way more than it's worth. And sellers, so they still their psychology, their, mentality is still COVID times. They're stuck in that and they don't want to budge. And so, like we're seeing, even just July, and it gets low, later into the summer and into the fall, the reality will hit sellers that they do need to come down in their prices. And so, and then another factor is that many buyers are also waiting for rates to drop. So a lot of buyers are waiting on the sideline saying, yeah, I know there's a lot of inventory out there, but the rates are just too high. Um, and so for buyers now, that means there's less competition. There's less people putting offers on houses right now because they're waiting for rates to come down. And so, yeah, the result is selective leverage for buyers, especially on stale or incentive heavy listings. So if there's houses that have been on a long time, a stale listing that's been on there, 3 or 4 or 5 months, they're going to be more motivated to sell. And so the hidden opportunities I want to go over today for buyers in this market are builder incentives, or sorry, to find motivated sellers, builder incentives, seller credits, creative financing, house hacking and multifamily, and then 100% financing options with no or low money down. So that would be kind of the agenda for today. Go to the next one. So finding motivated sellers. So when I talk to buyers about sellers who are motivated, we're trying to find people who need to sell. So you don't just want to find a seller who has their house in the market who just wants to sell. It's a good idea to sell. If I get this price, then I would sell. Those are sellers who are not motivated because they're not ready, willing, or able. So we want to find sellers who need to sell. So if their house has been on the market for a lot of days and there's been multiple price cuts, we see that on the MLS if it's notching down. Um, that shows that they're motivated. And so sometimes it's like, okay, well, the knife is dropping. Where do you catch the dropping knife? And it's like, well, we can just take that and put it wherever we want it. So vacant listings as well, because they're not living there. So obviously they have other plans, they've moved on. They don't need that, they're okay. Maybe they own it in cash and so they don't have a mortgage on it. Sellers who are relocating and they need to get out of it. Divorce situations actually are motivated sellers because they're going different ways. They need to sell it. One person can't afford the payment by themselves. Inherited or estate deals, those can be motivated sellers where they just, they inherit this house, they need to sell it, they need to get rid of it. um, as is or repair credits showing up. So as an agent, I can see private remarks on listings where it'll show like this house is sold as is, or that, giving $10,000 in credit to replace the flooring or something. So you can see that there's something probably wrong with the house. That if you're handy, you could take that on. And then also what we've been seeing is investors selling some houses. So, maybe they don't need the house anymore or they want to move on to another project. Sometimes sellers will just sell it at a motivated price, especially if they have another project that they think is going to be, a great investment. They're willing to let this go quickly without not for top dollar so they can put it into a different investment. All right. This one I like a lot, personally. I've done this, builder incentives. So buying new construction can be a great option. So it was like, I think it was the National Association of Home Builders said that 61 to 62% of builders are offering incentives right now. And then 34 to 38 of them are cutting prices, about 5% price cut. And so a lot of the times builders will give you a certain amount of money. They say, hey, buy this house, we'll give you $20,000 or $15,000 or up to $30,000 to do whatever you want with. Whether you want to use that money to buy down your rate, cover your closing costs, or just take it off the top line of the price. That's a great option because sometimes these new homes can actually be cheaper than resale homes. And so with new construction, we always have to look at your net payment, like what's it actually going to cost you, not just the list price. So if you see like a 3 bed, 2 bath house that's 80 or 20 years old, listed for 500, and you see a new house 3.2 listed for 500, they might not be actually the same price if the new house has an incentive on it. It might be actually cheaper. And so, this is a little bit of my story. We bought a brand new house in February 2024. we moved here, we're looking for a house. Um, and yeah, I mean, all the resale houses were, to us where we were at, it was too expensive. What we needed for our family, our home, all the resale houses looked pricey to us. And then we actually looked at Hayden homes, and the houses were brand new, bigger, nicer, and actually cheaper than resale homes. And it didn't make sense to us. And so we kept asking, asked a little bit more about it, and it was end of the month. It was actually end of the year, and they just needed to get, this inventory house. It was a spec house that they just built. It wasn't built specifically for one family. They just built it to sell. So it didn't have tons of upgrades, but it was just their basic home that they could use to show people. And it was end of the year, and they said, we need to get off our books. We have a $35,000 incentive for whoever's going to buy it. Whether you want to do a buy down, a rate buy down, or take it off your purchase price, or cover your closing costs. It's a really, really cool deal. But and also sometimes with new homes, you have to do fencing or landscaping in the backyard, usually fronts included. So I told them like, hey, if you include fencing and the backyard landscaping and the $35,000 incentive, we'll do it. And they said they said no a few times. But I went back to them and I said, if you'll do this, we'll do it. And they said, okay. Eventually, like, if you sign today, we'll do it. So yeah, we got a crazy deal. I think our lender also gave us 1% of the purchase price, since it was like a new build incentive. And so yeah, we covered all of our closing costs, and we were able to use the rest of the funds to do a 3-2-1 buy down. So that's where, our rate was maybe 5.5. Let's just say the rate's 6. So your standard rate is 6. If you do a 3-2-1 buy down, for the first year, it's 3 percentage points lower than your standard rate. So if it's at 6, your first year, your interest rate is going to be 3%. Your next year is going to be 4%. Your next year is going to be 5%. Then it's going to be up to 6%, the standard rate on the fourth year. If there's any lenders out there, hopefully I'm describing this right. You'll want to confirm with your lender about this as well. But that's basically it. So our first year, our rate was 3%. This year, our rate's 4%. Next year, it'll be 5%, and then 6%. And then hopefully, we'll refinance if the rates are lower in the future. Um, my friends bought the house right next to us with a similar incentive. They just took it off the purchase price. And so it really is, whatever makes the most sense for your situation. But it can be really helpful to get into a house with covering your closing costs, especially. Zach Davis, who I work with, he did the same thing this year. Just last month in July, they bought a brand new house they got a $25,000 incentive, and they were able to cover their closing costs and do a 2-1 buy down. So this year, their rate's 2% lower. Next year, it'll be 1% lower. Then it'll go up to the standard rate. So there's some options out there for sure. And if you're not going to do new construction, there's still a way to get credits from the seller. So if you have an older house that you're buying or something that's just not new, you can ask for seller credits to lower your cash to close. So you can use that to cover your closing costs, the cost of getting your loan, sometimes 2 or 3% of your loan amount. And you can also apply that towards rate buy downs, cover some of your prepaid costs to lower your monthly expenses. So there's quite a few things you can still do even with an older house in negotiating for that. So like we had a client who closed this year. We got, I think, $15,000 in closing costs for them. Even the house, we negotiated that in the very beginning. We said, okay, we'll do your asking price, but give us some closing costs, some credits to cover our closing costs. So if the house is 600,000, we said, hey, we'll do 600,000, but give us, $10,000 in closing costs so that we can, or seller credits, so we can cover our closing costs. Sorry. Um, so there's still, and then during the inspection, some issues came up that my buyers just wanted to deal with themselves. So we said, hey, can you just give us $5,000 more in seller credits to cover the closing cost, cover some repairs later on. So with older homes, houses that have been on the market longer, houses that are dropping in price, these are things that we can ask for, even if it's not a new house. Another option is creative financing. So this is kind of just a non-standard way. Normally you apply for a loan, you go find a house, you get a loan for that house. There are some other options for non-standard ways of doing that. So some houses have assumable loans, whether it's an FHA loan or a VA loan. Some of those are assumable. That depends on your qualifications and some of the logistics there. But like I saw a house that was, and sometimes you have to bring in the price difference a little bit, so your down payment might be higher, but you could get a really good rate depending on where that loan is. So yeah, I just saw a house listed in Coeur d'Alene last week or the week before that had an assumable loan, and their lender was willing to pass it on to the next person. Seller financing is also a really interesting option where basically the seller of the house becomes the bank. Usually this happens if the seller owns the house outright, if they don't have a mortgage on it, that, then they can basically, because they're not making payments to someone else, you can just make payments to them. So if the seller owned a house that was $400,000, without a loan on it, they could just take the payments directly from you over time. And so those terms, are negotiable and fixable because you're not going through a bank. Sometimes you can get a lower interest rate than a bank, or sometimes it's higher, but they require less down. So it can be more flexible, but it can be a good option depending on your situation and depending on the seller situation. This is one that I really like, and I think it's a really good idea for now, especially for single people or people willing to live with other people. And so a lot of people talk about house hacking, and that's normally when you buy a duplex, triplex, or fourplex. And so then those rents for the other units offset your payment. So if you bought a duplex, let's say your payment would be $4,000 a month, but you would rent out the other side for $2,000 a month. So that means your payment is really $2,000 a month, but you own a house that's worth more money, and that'll appreciate more over time. Or if you get a good deal on it and, or a triplex, let's say a triplex that is costing you $5,000 a month, but you rent out two of the other units for 2,000 each. So then you're only paying $1,000 a month. So there's ways you can game it. And then also you might not have to put, that much down. You could maybe put 3.5 or 5% down on a multifamily house. So you can get a really, without having to put a lot of money in, you can get a really great house that'll, cash flow hopefully. And then you can move out of it after a year or two and then do the same thing again. So if you're willing to live in a house that you're going to move into and then have other people live with you, it's a great way of buying a house that can be a rental in the future without having to put a lot of money into it. One that I'm looking at and getting into more, and I think it's a great idea for single people as well, or couples, or basically anyone that's willing to live with other people, is a single family hack. And so this is not looking for a duplex or triplex or fourplex. This is just looking for a standard house, a standard single family house. So basically you would buy that house and then you just rent out the other bedrooms to, anyone, to your friends or family or people on Facebook Marketplace. And so this is a really great way of covering your living expenses while, having a place to live and owning a house that's appreciating and your roommates are paying off your mortgage. So if you have a four-bedroom house and you charge, I think the standard rate for a bedroom in Kootenai County is like $700 to $900 a month. So if you have a house that's, costing you, 2,700 or 3,000 a month, but you're charging, $800 for three other bedrooms, that's pretty affordable for you to live in that house. And if there's five or six bedrooms, then you could almost even be, making money by owning that house and living in it. So living for free. Um, and then what I want to talk about next is how you can do that with, little or no down, the VA or FHA down payment assistance. And then Idaho has some new programs as well. So we have these 100% financing options. So even in some of these, you can even have zero money down to get into a house. So again, please check with your lender about these, and we have lenders that we can recommend as well. And if there are lenders on here, hopefully I'm saying all of this right, but this is my understanding from lenders that I've spoken with. And so if you're, a veteran, there are some or a service member, there's, VA loans available with 0% down. And then depending on your credit score, your income, your employment, so you can either go Idaho Housing, and that's a down payment assistance that is basically yeah, it's structured as a second mortgage. And so that can cover your down payment. And so you take a second mortgage to cover your down payment on your main, and you have your main mortgage as well. So, and I believe you need to bring like 0.5% at least to contribute towards the purchase. So if it's a $400,000 house, you bring $2,000. And then you can ask for seller credits as well. And there's all those things in there. Um, and then there's also, so yeah, so you're with these options as well, your monthly payment might be slightly higher because you're not putting as much cash down, but it saves your cash, in the long run if you don't want to put it all down or if you don't have a lot of cash to put down. And then there are some new 100% financing options from some local lenders and local credit unions that I've heard of where, again, depending on your credit score, um, they will finance 100% of your purchase under one mortgage. And so those are pretty competitive options as well, where I believe in those situations, you're just responsible for your closing costs, but you don't have to do a down payment. And so what we would do with that is that if we found a house that would work for you, we would ask the seller to give seller credits to cover your closing costs. And so it could be almost no money out of pocket for you. And so, yeah, these are some really cool options that are going on right now. And so one testimonial I want to share with you, I've shared with probably some of you already, is actually a house I have under contract at the moment. This is in Post Falls. I saw this come on the market and I jumped on it right away. Right when it went on, I went to check it out. Um, it's a single family home, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. It's a split level, so there's not a master bathroom. There's not a master bedroom and a master bathroom, so which is in for me, that's a plus for a rental like this. It was listed at 399. I got it under contract at 420 because there were other offers on there. So there's a lot of things we could do with this house. I could buy it as a primary residence and live in it with my family. And then, after a year or two, I can move out and turn it into a rental. Or I could just, or if it were just me, I could move in there and then live in one of the bedrooms and rent out the other 3 bedrooms. So I think running numbers on this as a primary, I think it was like $2,700 a month if I bought it as a primary with no money down. So I looked at one of those. I wanted to use that as an example. So I looked at one of the no money down, 100% financing options. It was, with no money down, I think it would end up being $2,700 a month, principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. So all in about 2,700. If I rented the other 3 rooms at 800 each, that's $2,400. So my living expenses would be about $300 a month. Um, and then, um, and if I bought it just as an investment, if I put 20% down, then I rent it out by room as well. I think if I put 20% down, depending on the program, my rent would be probably 22 to 2,500 a month, or the mortgage. So if I rent each room for $800, then that's, $3,200. So I'm already in the positive. And the kicker here is this house, it's actually set up to add 2 or 3 more bedrooms pretty easily. So you get it permitted by, the city. They allow you to do that. Just has to meet certain things. So this one's set up for it. If I add 2 or 3 more bedrooms and I rent them all out for $800 a month each, that's, 8 times, sorry, it's four. If I add three, 7 times 8, so it's 5,600 a month in rent. And if my monthly payments, $2,500 a month, if I have a property manager on top of that, maybe $3,000 a month, but it's renting for $5,600 a month, I'm cash flowing $2,600 a month, by putting 20% down. So it's a really good option to do the rent by the room, either as an investor buying a single family house and doing rent by the room and adding bedrooms as you can, or buying it for yourself to live in, which I would recommend to, tons of my friends is like buy this as a single family house for yourself, live in one of the bedrooms, rent out the other ones. Whether you add a couple extra bedrooms or not, that doesn't necessarily matter. Or you could do that when you move out. So that's just one example. I have this house under contract, doing inspections and stuff now, due diligence. So we'll see how it goes. But that's that's just me personally. I personally see the value in the current market and opportunities that are out there. So I'm watching the MLS every day, 5, 6, 7 times a day. I'm on the MLS seeing what news come up. I bought a condo earlier this year. It popped up on the MLS. I put an offer that same day. Then you still have your inspection period to do your due diligence. You have a week or so, depending on the terms, to back out with no consequences or not, or move forward if you'd like. So in a market like this, it's good to be ready to go. Um, so yeah, if rates fall, competition will likely jump up with prices. So when rates fall, everybody that's sitting on the sideline here, you can see these people sitting on the sideline. When rates fall, they're going to jump back in and start making more aggressive offers because they're going to feel like they can afford more because the rates are going to be low. And so supply is up, but because demand is rate sensitive, demand hasn't necessarily come up. So today you can have more leverage and more concessions. Tomorrow there's going to be more bidders, more people trying to buy that deal. So my advice is if we can find a good deal, go for it now and then refi, if and when rates increase or decrease. Um, so there's some hidden opportunities now, like we've been saying. So what I would recommend is get pre-approved now, talk to your lender, see what options are out there, know your price range so you can shop with clarity and confidence. So when we're going to look at houses, you know your range. And then you also can understand your monthly payment more. So you can have an idea of, I know at this price range, this is what I'm going to be paying a month. And then that helps you be able to move quickly because when a house comes on the market, you're going to be able to make a decision. Like when that condo came on the market, I knew I could afford it, so I made an offer right away. The house that I just showed you, it came on the market and I made an offer right away. I went to check it out right away, put an offer right away because I know that I can afford it. I know the numbers, I know it'll work as an investment property. And so it's good to be able to move quickly when the right things come on. Sometimes when deals are priced right in this market, they go fast. If things are overpriced, they sit long and long and long, and that's when we see, a lot of days on market, they're starting to drop the price. So it's kind of both. You can see both. Some sellers that are really motivated, they do price it right, and it does go fast because some people know that there are deals out there. So we say, like, not getting pre-approved is like going to the grocery store without your wallet. You can look around, but you can't get anything. So, let's see. Yeah, so I guess just to wrap this up, it's about 4:30, is that, we'd love to do a free buyer opportunity session with you, just a consult, just, connect and see what you're looking for, where you're at in the process, how we can help you. Would love to check if you're eligible for a 0% down or $0 down or 100% financing opportunity. And then also to run a custom like buy now versus wait scenario. So if you bought a house like the one that I had in the other slide, if you just bought it now, where would you be at in a year versus waiting a year and renting for a year or staying in the same situation for a year and then trying to buy something like that next year? Um, it's really interesting to look at those situations. When I moved here, that was my situation as well. So do I buy a new house? Do I move back to the house I had as a rent that was now a rental, or do I rent and then buy later? And for us, it was like the new construction was actually the cheapest way to go. Cheaper than renting, cheaper than moving back into the house that we had turned into a rental, because of the crazy incentive that they had. And so I think a lot of the times as humans, we just make assumptions that this makes the most sense, but it doesn't always make the most sense because if you're if you have expenses that you need to pay off to actually buy a house that would pay you and lower your other expenses can mean you can pay off, your debt or other things that are need to be paid off. If you have student loans or if you have other expenses that you're trying to work towards, if you have good credit, there's a lot of opportunities that you can actually leverage to pay those things off, and that'll actually help you be creating wealth and accumulating wealth in the appreciation of your home over time. So there's a lot of unique opportunities and strategies that we should look into. If it turns out it's not a good time for you to buy, then that's great. But I think it's worth investigating to see if there's a way that would work for you. Um, espe- Especially with the house hacking or the single home, either multifamily or just the regular house hacking where you get a house and you do the bedrooms. Um, but yeah, whether you're looking for your own house or your first house, second house, or investing, there's still a lot of options out there, I think. So yeah, would love to connect with you about what might be a good next step for you in terms of real estate. So yeah, and Zach and I, we invest ourselves. We are trying to grow our own portfolios. We buy our own primary houses. So we're in the market, just like everyone else. Zach just bought a house last month, and so I bought a condo this year. So we feel the pain of the high interest rates, but we're trying to find ways around that. So yeah, thank you guys for your time. I know we're just a couple minutes over 4:30. So thank you for joining. And this will be something that I think we're going to try to do every other week or so. So we'll have different topics every other week, just, a short informational session that hopefully brings value and clarity and helps you make good decisions in real estate, but also just, your financial situation in general. So yeah, thank you for joining and hope you have a good rest of your Thursday. Thank you. Bye.